Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you're doing well. I hope you're enjoying your Thanksgiving break, eating lots of foods. Calories are canceled for this week, by the way. I've actually cleared that with a federal judge. So go ahead and eat to your heart's delight. So we're going to talk really quickly about generalization. So you take your results of your study and you generalize them to a bigger population. Just there's just some rules, some things to think about, some considerations, and then we'll talk about reporting results, which is super easy. You guys did a great job with your critiques, so you know how to write. So remember, December 1, we're going to meet and you're going to do the presentations on the randomized control trials and on the meta-analyses. Remember, turn in your ethics modules if you haven't done so already, and then that's it. You're done. There's no final exam in this. Previous offerings did have a final exam, but the way that I'm assessing your knowledge on this is that you've all shown up to the lectures. You've all participated really, really well. You've all done your literature reviews very well, and so I have no worries that you guys have understood the main concepts of the course. So. With that, the presentations. So remember, there's this laundry list of things for your presentations. Make sure you make them between 30 to 45 minutes with a little bit of time for a Q&A, and then we'll go through them next Wednesday. So generalization, external validity, the extent to which you can apply the results of your research to a population outside of your research population. So you have your target population that you want to apply your results from your sample or your study, and the ideal thing would be for you to sample randomly from your target population. And when you do randomly, as you have learned, it is easy to get rid of biases and confounders and stuff like that when you do it randomly. You might still have a few issues here and there that you need to consider in your analysis and in your discussion, but overall, using as much of a random sampling as possible, it helps you, right? But we know that there's no such thing as truly random sampling. There's always something that gets in the way, convenience sampling or some other kind of sampling like that. And so, just keep in mind that, the best way for you to get a sample that is representative of your target population that you can then generalize back to them is that way. Internal validity, by the way, is, how, when you say that X causes Y within your study, how well did you prove that? So where did your participants come from, right? Were they volunteers? Did they self-select? Did they say, I'll participate? Were they selected at random? Was it a convenient sample? Oftentimes when we're doing research, we settle for the best that we can get, but we also need to make sure that what we are getting is as close to the target population as we can. Otherwise, it's kind of pointless to do the research, unless you're at the very beginning of your research of answering a question, and then a convenience sample is good. So one example that I'm getting ready to do here at the health department is that we are trying to get the knowledge, beliefs, and attitudes on drug disposal in the county, and we have no clue what people in the county think about drug disposal. Do they use drop boxes? Do they just flush things on the toilet, which they shouldn't? Do they just throw it in the trash? And if they do throw it in the trash, do they do anything special for needles? Even if they're not using illicit substances, people who use, for example, needles for diabetes, are they being careful with them? Are they putting them in a sharps container, etc.? And so we are going to start off with a convenience sample. But if we want to make more generalizations about what is going on, if we find something very significant here, that, for example, a particular group or a particular segment of the population is throwing all their drugs in the trash without any kind of care, then we need to do some sort of intervention. Then we might move into a more rigorous sampling method to understand exactly at the county level who is the problem, right, or who is having the problem. You also have to take into account the demographics of your participants, and the book talks about this with college students. Is your distribution of genders correct, or in this case, sex, biological sex? It's 50-50, right, in the population. So it should be close to that. One of the things that you saw from the discussion last week is that whole thing with high school graduates, right? If a high percentage of your participants did not graduate from high school, what is going on? Since graduation rates in the U.S. are pretty high, their cohort, and this is something that we forgot to discuss last week, within their cohort, what is the graduation rate? Because graduation rates have been getting better over years. So people who belonged in a high school cohort back in the 60s, back in the 50s, and the 40s might have lower rates. So you just have to think about that. So one of the things that we need to consider also, we need to consider sex, as we said, it's biological sex, male, female, for the most part. There are some individuals that are XXY or XYY, in addition to the XX and XY that we know about, right? But these are very rare. They come with associated syndromes, and this is most people on a 50-50 basis. Gender, as we talked about, is how you view yourself, how society views you with respects to your identity, right? So this is more subjective than the objective of your chromosomal makeup. Race, also subjective, right? We like to think of race as something that is very objective, that you belong to a race and you're either white or you're black or you're Asian, but it's subjective, because what is white, right? It is somebody who is white, somebody who comes from Europe for the most part, but what part of Europe? Eastern Europe, Western Europe, Southern Europe, Northern Europe, right? Same thing with black, African American. Are you black? And this is something that I think I've discussed with you guys before. Are you black because your ancestors were brought here when they were enslaved, or are you black in what is called the Atlantic exchange? Or are you black because you're a recent arrival from Africa, or you're the first, second, third generation of arrivals from Africa post-slavery, right? So immigration. And I'll show you a couple of examples about that here in a little bit. And then your identity, right? Who you are. Do you identify within the structure of the study, right? If we are trying to know the knowledge, beliefs, and attitudes of people in Fairfax County with regards to drug disposal, we need to know how people identify within the county, right? Do they identify as county residents? Do they identify as people who use substances, who would throw them away? People might use substances and not think, that they are substance users, even if they are using something that is prescription. Things like that. So a lot of it has to do with how you view yourself, how society views you, and of course the law, how the law views you. When we're trying to do studies on substance use, it's very, very hard to get people to be honest, because by definition illicit substances are illegal, and people will not openly admit to doing an illegal thing, right? Like consuming illicit substances. And so that gets tricky. The law gets in the way of us understanding what is going on. So the book talks about culture, and I wanted to point out the interesting things about the word culture is that you often think of the American culture or the Western culture, thinking globally, the Western world, and then human culture, right? And so here in this picture, I have three groups of men, and depicting three cultural groups within the United States. You have the Duck Dynasty guys. My favorite is Uncle Si, just because he likes to troll the manhood of the other group. So anyways, you have the country, mostly Southern, camel wearing, manly man idea, right, or culture. You have the black or African American dandy culture, that within the African American culture it's a subculture, right? Very well dressed. I wish I could pull off a 3-piece suit like these guys do. And they're certainly their own culture. And then you have the cholos, the gangsters, I guess, mostly in the Southwest United States, Southwestern United States Hispanic culture, right? But we certainly see gangs from different parts of the world and different parts of the United States as well. But when we say, gang culture, that's code, and we'll talk a little bit about language, but it is code for Latin American, mostly Latin American gangs, right? Or maybe even African American gangs. Rarely do you hear the term gang culture applied to a group of white kids who are out for no good. But anyways, when you use the word culture and you're analyzing cultural effects of X and Y, the culture of violence, the culture of drug use, the culture of this, the culture of that. When you write and you report your results, you need to really define culture. What are you if you say, the American culture? Well, is it this group? Is it this group? Or is it this group? What are you saying by American culture when you say the Western world? It's very different, right? Because when you say that, you include Europe or Western Europe and the culture. I've been to Italy. It's very different than the culture in other parts of the world. So when you're writing your reports and when you're making generalizations, be very careful and very accurate, as accurate and descriptive as you can, as what you mean by culture. So, example number one, me, right? Am I Hispanic because I speak Spanish? Am I Latino? Am I Latinx? By the way, in Spanish, Latinx confuses people because in Spanish is a gendered language, and so we say Latino or Latina. Am I Mexican because I was born in Mexico? Am I Texan because I grew up in Texas? Or am I American because that's my citizenship, right? And oftentimes I identify in different ways depending on the context, right? If I am talking about my country of origin and my immigration and how I came to the U.S., then I might identify as Mexican. If I'm in Texas and, I want to talk about Texas and Texas politics or Texas whatever, then I'm Texan because I spent the first 20 years of my life there. I'm American because I was naturalized as an American citizen. A lot of members of my family are American citizens, and I qualified for citizenship after a while. Am I talking to other Hispanic people from other parts of the country and other parts of the world? Then I'm Latino or Hispanic, depending on the context of that discussion. So when you're talking to subjects that you are studying, then you need to you need to ask them to be as straightforward with the definition of who they are. When it comes to socioeconomics, from age 0 to 16, I lived in poverty. Family wasn't making a lot of money, and we lived in subsidized housing and bounced from house to house, or even homeless for a year or so. So once I got into college, I was a poor college student. I certainly had more of a socioeconomic advantage than people who didn't get into college, right? I was able to qualify for grants and loans and stuff like that, which I'm still paying today. Then when I graduated college and I started working a good job, I was lower middle income, right, as a lab tech, working on my MPH, etc. Then I get into the PhD program and I get a scholarship for that, and I become middle income, especially since I married my wife, who's a physician assistant, and she was making good money. I was working as a consultant as well, doing data analysis and epidemiology, and so we were moving up the ladder, and then now we consider ourselves upper middle income. I'm a doctor, I have my doctor in public health. She is a very experienced physician assistant. We have our little one. We live in suburbia. We live in a nice house that we are paying for. So we definitely have moved up. And so, again, when you're studying the experiences of people, you need to take this into consideration. If somebody were to include me in a study of the socioeconomic association between my socioeconomics and some sort of outcome, whether my overweight or if I later on have some sort of disease or some sort of mental health condition, at which point, right, you have to consider both the individual variation of socioeconomics and you have to consider the group variation of socioeconomics. So these are all things that you need to define. You need to define culture. You need to define who somebody is. Another example is Patrick. So Patrick is an immigrant from the Dominican Republic. He is dark-skinned. He can trace his roots back to enslaved people that were brought over to the island. So is he black? Is he African-American? Because now he is a U.S. citizen. but he is like so many black folks in the U.S. can trace back his roots to slavery. Is he Latino because he speaks Spanish and comes from the Dominican Republic, but the primary language is Spanish? Is he Dominican? Like I'm Mexican. Is he Bronxian because he lives in the Bronx? And again, socioeconomics in the Dominican Republic, very, very poor. And once he moved to New York City, middle income because his both parents found really good jobs. Mother as a nurse, father as an engineer. And then now that he's living in D.C., upper income, very wealthy because he landed a really good job in a startup that eventually hired him as a CEO, and they've been making millions of dollars, and he's been profiting very well from that. So again, the definition of who people are, especially when you're studying them with regards to their behaviors, with regards to their health, etc., certainly changes throughout the years. And I'm sure you guys can also identify the changes that have happened in your life, that you are not the same person that you were several years ago. And you probably will not be the same person that you are now because you'll be improving, you're getting your master's degrees, you're getting your doctorates, etc. So all these things need to be defined. They need to be very clearly explained. And you saw in some of the studies, we did a cross-sectional study of mothers, and intimate partner violence. We'll define who the partners were, right? Were they husbands, boyfriends? Define violence. Was it physical violence, verbal violence? Define all those things. Mothers, so mother of one versus mother of 2, 3, 4, etc. Think about all those things when you're generalizing. And then when analyzing the results or looking at the data, reproducibility, right? We don't rely on just one study, especially if the study was a pilot study with low number of participants and a convenient sample. We want to make sure that the results are consistent and they keep happening. And this is something that is key to science, right? To understanding and developing theories of how the world works. And in the follow-ups, did they use the same methods? Did they adjust for all the problems seen in the first set of studies? Or did it uncover all new problems, right? Reproducibility is key here. If you see a claim about something, go look for another study that backs it up, and then a third one, and then a fourth one. It just needs to be better as time goes on, the level of reproducibility. And then reporting your results. Like I said, you guys did great in your written assignments, so I'm not too worried about your ability to do reporting results. But I do have to say, you have to be clear and concise, because there really is no need to write everything out, is there? I mean, you can summarize the main points in a few sentences instead of big old paragraphs. Usually people write a lot just because they want to fill some quota on words or space on a page or time during a presentation. What they end up doing instead is confusing the heck out of everyone and burying their main points in pointless dribbles. What was the main point of all this? Right? Main point is summarize the main points in a few sentences. That's it. Right? There's not a need to overwrite. I know that, and that's why I was telling you guys that I hate word counts and I hate word limits. I kind of put them in at the beginning when I get a feel for how a class is going to go, because I can always tell when somebody just wants to get something done and they don't do a good job of defining everything that they need to define in their write-ups. And then you have the people who, because they're clear and concise, they end up adding a lot of extraneous things because they want to meet the word count. So clarity and conciseness, very, very important. Plagiarism, I wish I didn't have to tell you guys, but I had that experience with the other class this semester, so don't do it. Just don't do it. Quotes may not be enough. You need to actually cite your sources. And you can plagiarize ideas too, right? You can write something as that is original on its face, right? A paragraph that has nothing in common with anything else ever written by mankind, but the idea behind it, you took it from somebody else. And so then that's plagiarism of ideas. And when in doubt, just cite, or when in doubt, just say, according to so-and-so, according to CDC. I do that a lot too. I try to do that a lot, of just, according to CDC, according to NIH, according to Substance Abuse and Mental Health Administration, etc. And then just go on with my own idea, like, or building upon what CDC said, something like that, to just kind of make sure that I'm not plagiarizing an idea. And when in doubt, just cite, just put your citations, your references, etc. This will allow you to prevent a lot of problems, because these things really do follow you in your academic progress and in your careers. When you have to present your transcript, or you have to talk about your experiences in grad school, and there's a ding for plagiarism, people will think twice before hiring you. And then finally, language is ever evolving, right? Instead of saying slaves, we are now moving toward an era of saying enslaved people. Instead of saying addicts, we are now moving toward an era of saying drug users or substance users. Instead of saying pimps, we are now moving towards traffickers because they traffic in people. Instead of saying pregnant women, we are now saying pregnant person because we have to be aware that somebody might not identify as a woman, but they might still get pregnant because they're biologically female, right? And so pregnant person. And this is, I know that a lot of people are now doing the whole, oh, you're being woke. Well, it is and it isn't. You're being sensitive to, you're trying to not come off as a jerk. And you're being sensitive to how language is being used. And you're also like not putting labels on people, right? And so slavery, for example, is something that was done to people. It's not who they were. They were not born slaves, although some of them were born into slavery, right? They were enslaved. People who use substances, absolutely all of us are subject to becoming addicts, right? To being addicted to something. But most of us are just users, right? I'm going to go home tonight and drink a little bit of tequila, watch a movie, and I'm using alcohol, right? I eat more than I should, to be honest. And so I'm a user of food as well. So this kind of just, again, the definition of things, language is ever evolving. So just be aware, look at the most recent literature and follow the lead from the most recent literature. Follow the lead from the style guides, from the style guides from APA or MLA, depending on how you're doing your citations and your formatting. The Associated Press has really good guidelines on how to write style, your writing style. Organizations, LGBTQ organizations have style guides for addressing things like, cisgender, transgender. The word transvestite is not being used anymore because you're not necessarily dealing with somebody who just cross-dresses. The identity has evolved. So again, this is just some tips that language is evolving. Be open to changing your language. It doesn't mean that you're more woke or you're less woke. It just means that you're adapting to the language, and it's important that we adapt because it's important to communicate that way. And so one of the things that I use often is I'll refer in my writing to somebody who is black, and then I will use a parentheses, African American, right? Unless I am speaking to, I'm saying, for example, in Fairfax, I'm talking about a specific group of people who are either recent arrivals from Africa, then I will say black African, or I will just say black, And oftentimes, like the example of Patrick, Dominican Republic, dark-skinned, can trace his roots back to enslaved people from Africa. But he doesn't identify as black, he identifies as Hispanic or Latino, and so it's a little bit tricky there. And so you have to make sure that how you write, that your writing comes off of your definitions of understanding how people who participating in your study identified, and we try to avoid non-dash, like non-whites, non-blacks. So if you were saying, for the sake of space, you might say whites and non-whites, but you really should say white and black and African and Asian and Hispanic, etc. Inclusive of all the groups that you have in your study and your research. Same thing with blacks and non-blacks. So these are just some tips. And so that's it, guys. That's it for the last wrap up. And if you have any questions, comments, you know how to get a hold of me. We will meet again on December 1st. We will do the presentations, and then we'll close it out. That'll be the end of the course. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoy your break, and I will talk to you next week.